Let's talk about our hopes and dreams, beyond the reach it seems. Let's talk, confess I live in hell, I failed to fall in scheme. Maybe we can find a pathway forward or a clue, so we may together be a symbiotic harmony, where I can talk to you, you can talk to me. Let's talk, let's talk. Let's talk, let's talk, let's talk.
Hello, my name is Reverend Arnold Thomas, and welcome to the Talk Vermont. I am pleased and privileged to be here with my panelists, and I will briefly introduce them and then allow them to introduce themselves and their program a little bit further. But I have with me Jill Martinez Diaz, who is Executive Director of the Vermont Asylum Assistance Project, Lia Ernst, who is Legal Director for the ACLU of Vermont, and Big Hartman, Executive Director of the Human Rights Commission of Vermont. We're going to talk about what is commonly referred to as the enemy within project of our present President, Donald Trump, and we're going to try and figure out how his policies affect the life, the work, and the human rights issues concerning this state. And so let's start in by introducing further our individuals here, our panelists here, and the programs they represent. Starting with you, Jill.
Thank you, Arnold, and thank you both for letting me be on a panel with you and for having this conversation with you. I am Jill. I use they, them pronouns, and Vermont Asylum Assistance Project is a long overdue free legal services program serving non-citizen Vermonters who are at risk of adverse immigration action, who are applying for immigration status and seeking safety here in our state. We started as a volunteer-led initiative, incorporated in 2023, hired me as its first staff in early 2024. And in just the last 18 months, we've been able to meet the moment and welcome Vermont's first Immigrant Justice Corps Law Fellows and grow now into a staff of several legal and lay advocates who leverage volunteer networks around the state to increase access to justice for asylum seekers and people who are detained. We also deliver community education programs and curate a resource library online and advocate in the State House. Our vision is to transform, make lasting transformation for immigrant access to justice in Vermont.
Good, thank you. Big.
Thank you so much for having me today.
My pleasure.
It's really a pleasure to sit here with you all. My name is Big Hartman. I'm the Executive Director and General Counsel at the State of Vermont Human Rights Commission. The Human Rights Commission is a state agency. Our mission is to advance full civil and human rights in Vermont. We do that by enforcing the Vermont Fair Housing and Public Accommodations Act primarily. We also enforce Vermont's anti-discrimination protections in employment as they apply to state employees. So our office is engaged in investigations of complaints of discrimination and in housing, in public accommodations, including schools, and in state employment. And we're also involved with policy work at the State House and with policy leaders across the state, as well as trying to do as much education and outreach work about human and civil rights as we possibly can.
Great.
Yeah.
Lia.
I echo my co-panelists in expressing my appreciation for having us on today. My name is Lia Ernst. I use she, her pronouns. I am the legal director at the American Civil Liberties Union of Vermont. The ACLU of Vermont is, of course, the statewide affiliate, but we have affiliates in every state, DC and Puerto Rico, as well as the mothership, National ACLU. And so we're independent, but we work together in concert with and are able to bring to bear all the resources that come with being part of this nationwide network. When I joined the ACLU of Vermont 10 years ago, I joined the same day as another attorney, and we brought the staff all the way up to 4 people. Today, we're in a hiring process, which when completed, we will be 14.
Wow.
And that growth has meant that we really get to leverage a wide array of tools and sorts of expertise and talents that, when we were mostly just litigation, we could never have the same impact that we're having now, where we have folks in the State House and lobbying the executive branch. We have strategic communications, we have development, and we have professionals across the board that we're able to bring all of those tools together to address the most pressing civil liberties issues of our day.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Lia. And just a point of information, I sit on the Board of Trustees for the Vermont ACLU, so I'm a little bit biased in their regards as well. But let's go into the questions. In 6 months, President Trump has been in office. He has issued 164 executive orders, including protecting our borders from so-called illegal immigrants, providing refuge to white South Africans, dismantling federal DEI programs, withdrawing funds from public broadcast stations and research grants from universities, threatening transgender rights, determining the curriculum of local school districts, and strengthening the weaponization of local and state law enforcements against whatever his administration deems to be a threat to society. Just to name a few. How have these decisions impacted your human rights efforts in Vermont? And what priorities have you taken in confronting them? Now, some of the categories that I mentioned may not directly tie into the work that you do, and if it doesn't, inform us. Let's start with, since I started with you, Jill, let's start with you, Lia, this time around.
Yeah, I mean, it's truly impossible to overstate the impact of this administration across every sector of society. When we were sort of staring down the barrel of a second Trump administration, we were planning, we were researching, we were getting coalitions together, and we were really focusing on a few areas that we knew were likely to be targets of this administration. So that's, of course, immigrants' rights, LGBTQIA rights, the ability to access reproductive health care, and the ability to practice, whether in institutions or schools or in employment, efforts to fight discrimination and to uplift equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging. And so we knew these were going to be targets. Sort of overarching all of that, we also knew there were going to be a host of issues that touch on all of these areas related to privacy, surveillance, and free speech. And so we started planning, and as has come to pass, of course, all of those plans, all of those predictions have come true, and then some, right, with all of the other areas you mentioned and beyond. And so we find ourselves in a time where we're really having to leverage the fact that we have a nationwide network, that we have such strong community organizations and partner organizations here in Vermont. And the work that has been done in coalition and with real integrity and real deliberation has been extremely inspiring. These are extraordinarily scary times, and to see the way that folks across the state, across the country have stepped up to say no, to say this is not the country we want, this is not the way we want to live, has been, I think, the only thing that's going to keep us going through these next few years.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Lia. Big.
Well, I think as a state agency, the Human Rights Commission really isn't directly impacted by what is happening at the federal administration level, because our office enforces state laws. And those state civil rights protections cannot be undone, removed, or disappeared by any action at the federal level. We have these state laws passed at a state level, and our work will only continue. And I do feel like our office has felt a a more pressing need for us to devote more resources to enforcing at the state level our anti-discrimination protections, because in many ways we can no longer rely on the federal government to do that work. Agencies like HUD, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights are really pulling back purposefully and deliberately on enforcing anti-discrimination protections, especially for queer and trans people. So we aren't going to back down at all. We are going to just amp up our efforts to protect those rights of all of our Vermont community members every day. And we have seen, to echo what Lia was describing, a real coalition coming together, and we're joining forces in a lot of important ways. And in many ways, I think that this federal attempts to pull back the rights of Americans is going to be spurring a civil rights movement, the likes of which we have never seen before.
I hope so. I hope so.
That's what I feel here in the field with activists, lawyers, and people who care. Yeah.
Jill.
So in the direct immigration legal services space, a few thoughts come to mind. I think one, I don't want to make light of the very real and immediate harm that the last 6 months of executive policy, whether enacted legally or blatantly illegally, the harm that it has had on communities, the communities that we serve, the communities that we work alongside shoulder to shoulder. There are people who are going to prison, who are being banished, who are being separated from their families, whose rights are being denied at every stage of their legal proceeding, and who won't have meaningful remedy or recourse because there's a shortage of counsel nationally. There already was before this year. So it has been very impactful what has happened. There have been real harms. At the same time, there are many parts of the system that continue to work as they were designed to by our constitutional drafters and by Congress when they created the legal framework. So for every example-setting, fear-mongering case of a city comptroller who's arrested at immigration court, every day there are Vermonters appearing in USCIS, immigration benefits proceedings or immigration court proceedings in Boston, and are winning their cases and getting their day in court and getting granted the benefits that they're entitled to under federal law. And so I do think that fear is the strategy. Flooding the field with fear and exhausting advocates with this overwhelming wave of questionably legal and blatantly illegal policy changes is really, I think it's designed to tire us out. It has been an exhausting 6 months, and we're constantly having to kind of pivot our strategies. But what we're finding is that if we pace ourselves, and to echo my co-panelists, if we collaborate and come together as a united front, collectively, there are more of us than there are of them, and we can have our day in court and we can out-litigate them. I think that we have the people power to hold the line with respect to the rule of law, and make sure that at the end of what will undoubtedly continue to be really harmful for individuals and families caught in the crosshairs, at the end, I am also hopeful for the movement that might flow from this moment. And so as advocates, to answer your question about how are we confronting this as direct legal service providers, we're trying to diversify, just like our co-panelists, our strategy. We could easily fill our time as attorneys with however many cases an attorney could reasonably complete in a year, right? But we're saving our time deliberately to go out and train the trainer, to empower community-based organizations to have the information they need to deliver Know Your Rights to their community groups, to support volunteer attorneys in the private bar to get comfortable with joining us in this kangaroo court litigation that we do in the immigration space, and also making sure that we're taking advantage of every opportunity at the state level to improve immigrants' lived experience. The feds might get to decide who has immigration status, but Vermont actually has a lot of say in what that status or lack of status means for everyday life. So we're hoping to continue growing our capacity for direct legal services, but also scaling our impact by diversifying with these other advocacy strategies.
Great. I need to add that the church that I pastored before retiring, Good Shepherd Lutheran Church, organized a program called the Chittenden Asylum Assistance Network. And so I imagine they've been working with your organization as well in trying to protect whatever efforts the administration is pursuing to deport immigrants from the state.
Yeah, it was actually CASAN and their analogs around the regions of Vermont. They affiliate through the Vermont Asylum Support Network. And it was that network of community advocates who convened, identified the shortage of immigration counsel in Vermont, and worked with partners, including myself when I was at the law school, to co-found VAP. And one of those organizations was our fiscal sponsor, and we continue to work very closely with all of them.
Great, great. I guess I want to ask also the question, and I guess it directly relates to your work, Big, with the state. To what extent, and the rest of you can chime in too, because I expect you to what extent is especially federal agencies within the state, HUD and so forth, and law enforcement agencies cooperating with the administration, and to what extent do you find it resisting the efforts that are coming down the pike from the federal government?
What I've seen is that federal agencies in Vermont that work on anti-discrimination are being heavily defunded, and their staff are being cut. It wasn't that many folks, honestly, to begin with. So losing a Vermont base of a HUD office, for example, is, it's definitely concerning. But I think overall, HUD is still relaying a general willingness to engage in the Fair Housing Assistance Project that provides some funding for our office, albeit a lot of the staff we used to work with are no longer employed there. They still seem to be moving forward with that program, and we're happy about that. We did see earlier this year the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights close some cases that were in monitoring or possibly in investigation, and that work, some of that work may get picked up by the U.S. Department of Justice without having as much of the federal government, the federal administration intervening with that or impacting that. And for us, we will pick up whatever slack is left in doing what we can. And as far as what law enforcement officers are doing, or law enforcement agencies in Vermont, I'm really not able to speak to that.
That will most likely be another session of the Talk Vermont later on.
Right.
Lia, as far as I know, the ACLU has been pretty busy addressing. To what extent do you find the state either cooperating or not working with you in the work that you do?
Yeah, so Joe mentioned that so many of these executive orders are questionably legal at best and blatantly unlawful at worst. And so one thing that's been very important for us to do is educate institutions and entities in the state, private and public, that you do not need to voluntarily, preemptively comply with these unlawful directives. And so early on in this administration, we drafted a sign-on letter that 160-some faith leaders and nonprofit organizations and business leaders signed on, calling for this administration and for the state writ large to stiffen their spines, to provide the kind of robust, bold, visionary leadership this moment demands, and to use the tools and the power that the people have given them to serve the people's business, to serve the people's interests in resisting these unlawful federal overreach attempts. We followed that up with an open letter to Vermont institutions providing legal guidance and analysis of why and how they shouldn't automatically preemptively comply with the next time an EO comes down targeting them. And we saw this in the education context when there was an EO issued that required all states to certify their compliance with this administration's twisted interpretation of federal civil rights law, Title VI. And the initial response was, sure, we'll certify. And then there was an uproar as, people in the education community throughout the state were just appalled. We will not sign on to this interpretation of federal law that is not supported by history, case law, common sense. And the administration switched course. And that's the sort of response that we want to see. We want to see people being educated and knowing that what levers they have and what power they have, and our institutions to know you do not have to bend and cave to this administration. Mm-hmm. It's a paper tiger. Its executive orders will not and have not been standing up in court for the most part. And we, the people of Vermont, need you to have our backs, and if you do, we will have yours.
Good. That's encouraging. This may be somewhat of a infrastructure dream question to ask, but what are, as far as you're concerned, the social, legal, and legislative structures that are needed to be in place to prevent Vermont from caving in to the demands of the administration? Vermont is considered, I guess, probably one of the more progressive states. We have seen many red states, so-called red states, complying, but we have also seen some resistance, even within those states, among people who consider themselves conservative Republicans, now saying this is a bridge too far. So, what do you envision is needed as far as this state is concerned, as far as what we have or what we need, as far as an infrastructure to prevent further atrocities such as this from happening and prevent our state from caving into those demands? Let's start with you, Jill.
I'll start. What a big question, and a wonderful question. I think, again, I want to acknowledge that it was never the responsibility of the most vulnerable, impacted people of our communities to carry the brunt of preserving rule of law and fundamental freedom for everyone. And I'm disappointed that a lot of these pre-existing vulnerabilities in the immigration system that practitioners and scholars have been warning about for a long time are now, being utilized to cause harm to these communities, but with a silver lining that there's awareness building about these injustices like never before, and there's an opportunity to make meaningful change like never before. I don't want to discount the real harm that is being experienced by individuals, and it is true that there is this opportunity now. And some of these vulnerabilities in the system, immigration is, it's a politicized issue, it's a racialized issue, it's historically, it's been insulated from any kind of checks and balances since the history of the modern immigration framework was introduced. Courts have found that national security is an interest that supersedes all other interests, including individual rights, and so we're going to let the executive do what they want to do. And the law has been written this poorly for all this time. In terms of this, there's been some dormant provisions in the law that have just been waiting to fall into the wrong hands to be detonated. Now, finally, we're seeing the opportunity for these provisions to get reviewed by judges who are asking, could Congress even have written that? Was that even legal? Or is the Trump administration applying the law lawfully now in individual cases? And we're seeing, by and large, to Lia's point, a majority trend that the laws were written illegally, the policies are passed illegally, and they're being applied illegally against individuals. And so I long feared that immigration would be this straw man where an executive seeking to consolidate power could expand their power and be insulated from accountability and review. And so kind of zooming out, I think I feel really fortunate to be an immigration lawyer in Vermont in 2025 because with this widespread awareness of these pre-existing injustices, everyone has swiftly sprung into action and mobilized some incredible changes here in Vermont that other states are looking to replicate now locally in their jurisdictions. So here in Vermont, the way that some executive sectors have convened multi-stakeholder groups like Treasurer Pichak's Federal Transition Task Force to bring some kind of methodology to how do we make sense of the changes that are happening, how do we work across interest groups and sectors and bipartisan, across parties to think about weathering the storm collectively as a Vermont. It's a really interesting model that we're looking at replicating in the immigration services space. And I know from partners in the National Immigration Bar that other states are looking to as well.
Good. Big. Lia, either one.
I mean, it's such a big question. The question being generally like, what needs to be in place for there to not be federal overreach and abuses, right? And the reality is that that's always been something our country has struggled with, right? From its inception, there's been injustice. There's been things that we didn't think of, we didn't set up right. Corruption happened, people were harmed, rights were violated, and the system still has kept working in a lot of ways by allowing for there to be the checks and balances, allowing there to be a way to reform our Constitution, our laws, both at the local, state, and national level. And I think that what is happening now is a continuation of that, and I really share that sentiment of being grateful to get to practice law in Vermont in this moment in history. I think the real important thing is to recognize those of us who have privilege and power, and who want to take a stand, that we continue to apply pressure and do our part and work to challenge these things on all angles and make the changes while those challenges are happening. And some of those are going to be at the national level, and I think for me it feels much more manageable to think about state and local change, and building our coalitions and thinking about reform and strengthening our state law protections that don't rely on a federal system that has a lot of flaws. It's great to be in Vermont where the Attorney General's office is unwavering in challenging federal overreach and unconstitutional and illegal acts. In the first administration, our state Attorney General was, responsible for, filing, I think, around 68 lawsuits against the Trump administration and won something like 64 of them, and they were ready to go this time around and have been a really important part of that effort of legal court cases that challenge it. But I think legal court cases are just one way. I think at the state level, we are also seeing expansions to our state constitutional protections that are being contemplated. A state equal protection constitutional amendment is nearing passage in the next couple of years, and it couldn't come at a better time. while we're also strengthening state civil rights protections and enforcement. And those of us who have the ability to push for strengthening, the supports for our community members that are impacted in the meantime, we should be devoting all of our resources to doing that.
Great, great. Lia.
Well, my co-panelists stole a lot of my thunder already, but I would just add that we have everything we need in order to mount the most effective, most meaningful resistance to the harms that this administration is seeking to visit upon its people. We have a constitution that is significantly more protective of individual rights and freedoms than its federal counterpart. Our colleagues at the National ACLU pulled together a very comprehensive document called Firewall for Freedom that lays out in areas of immigrants' rights, reproductive health, privacy, all these areas we've been talking about, things that you could do at the state level to help mitigate these impacts. And we were able to walk down that thing and say, we have that, we have that, we have that. We already had a lot of these protections in place, and we've seen additional ones put into place this last legislative session. We have an extraordinarily vibrant network of community organizations and partners that are committed day in and day out to doing the work. And we have people who are showing up at protests regularly. I mean, unlike in numbers we haven't seen in a very, very long time, and not just one day, now I've done my bit. Mm-hmm. People are committed. They're out there day after day. They're writing to the governor, their legislators, and I think Vermonters are largely aware of the moment we're finding ourselves in and looking for the ways that they can make meaningful investment of their time in order to, help in this shared project that we've been talking about today.
Great, great. As far as American history is concerned, there has always been a bias, I think, on the part of the public toward immigrants coming into this state. Certainly that was the case as far as people of Asian descent. Certainly that was the case, and certainly is more now the case as far as people of Latina coming across our southern borders. And I imagine to some extent that also applies to people who are coming from West Africa or the Caribbean to places like Vermont. It used to be that when the state provided action against communities of color, including African Americans, we would have recourse to federal and national agencies to try and prevent this harm from happening. Those recourses are now diminished, and it looks like we're turning now to the state for protection, whereas the federal levels are starting to crumble. Hopefully, not completely. Are we as a nation gradually becoming more and more a house divided when it comes to issues of discrimination, when it comes to issues of who's in and who's out?
I'll take the first crack.
Go for it.
Yes, I think we are. I think we're extremely polarized. I think this administration has a real talent for both creating that polarization and then weaponizing it and leveraging it to serve its own ends. I don't think these are times that are unprecedented in our history. I think we've, both in terms of the expansion and contraction of rights, the expansion and contraction of efforts to tear down barriers between people. I think that we've been through cycles and, progress, backslide. I think that's the story of American history. That doesn't mean that progress is inevitable. We have to work for it. We have to make it happen. We have to grab it. And it doesn't mean, as Jill was saying, that people won't be harmed in the interim. But I do believe that, you mentioned sort of recourse to federal courts. It was federal courts that freed Ramesa Oster. It was a federal court that freed Mohsen Madawi, Mahmoud Khalil. The federal courts are still a venue for vindication of our rights, and we've seen this across the country. I mentioned we have a more protective state constitution. We have directed a lot of our work into the state courts. And as Jill said, the courts are not going to save us by themselves, right? We have to leverage every single tool we have, and we have so many, and ensure that we are working together in the way that we have. Just this past 3, 4, 5 months has been unlike the 10 years I've been here in terms of working across coalition. It's been spectacular and effective. And I think when people see the work having effect, when people see that the vision for the future that we are offering is one that is better for everyone, not just a select few, we can start tearing down those divisions and start realizing that a better world for all of us is possible and within reach, as opposed to a world right now where no one's particularly pleased with what's happening. Everyone's aggrieved, and even the folks who are calling the shots right now are operating out of anger and grievance. It's just not. It's not a vision of the world that anyone should want to embrace, and I think we need to tell the compelling story of the future we can have, that is one that treats everyone with dignity, respect, and equality.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Lia. Others?
I think we've always been a house divided. I think that the way that we started this country was highly problematic, considering that there was already many nations of people living here on this land. The fact that women and queer people were completely excluded from the conversation about democracy for at least half of our history, if not longer. The division has always been there. I think the way we're divided now is evolving with the times, and because of technology and because of the way we communicate now has changed drastically, right? But I think that the divisions have always been there. The resistance to the injustice has always been there. And that we've had folks across the political spectrum be unhappy all the time. And that's kind of what makes the system the way it is now, which is flawed and a lot of political compromise and less than ideal, but we keep doing it. We keep doing it, and we keep trying to do better by one another. And I think as the civil rights have expanded, they've expanded a lot, and the voice of the people has broadened, especially in the last 5 years. Mm-hmm. And what we are seeing is a reaction to that.
Yeah.
It's that progress, that backlash, the progress and the backlash, and that's the dance that we're going to be doing.
Yeah, I think about this a lot, not simply I want to have an understanding of the foundations of this legal system that we all work within, right? And any public interest lawyer has asked themselves many times, and sometimes over and over again, do we fundamentally believe that it is possible to achieve justice within like a fundamentally flawed system, a system that was founded in injustice? Can we make justice happen, or can we improve people's lived experiences, or reduce harm to people who are vulnerable? And I think we all continue to do the work day to day because, ultimately we land on the side of yes, right? That is possible, that we can help improve people's lived experiences or help them reduce their risk of harm. And it helps me to stay regulated and grounded because, again, if fear is the strategy and the administration is hoping to exhaust us and overwhelm us by flooding the fear with this feeling of things are changing for the worse now at a rapid pace that we can't quite get a hold of, this is unprecedented. I try to challenge some of those scripts and beliefs that I hear in my own head. Because they help me to stay grounded in the present moment, to bring a long view perspective. The same week that the Lincoln administration signed the Emancipation Proclamation, he also ordered the mass execution of Dakota resistance activists in the Black Hills. who are fighting for their land. And I try to hold all of that in my mind as I look ahead and think, okay, what do we actually need? And to bring this here to Vermont, something I'm really concerned about as an immigrant rights activist, but also some conversations that I've been having across aisles and across ideologies, is what's at stake for Vermont, not just in terms of our social and political freedoms and rights, but also for our social and economic future as a state, with an aging demographic and a workforce shortage and an affordability crisis being fueled by a dwindling taxpayer base. We, Vermont, no matter what your ideology is or how you come to the conversation of the Trump administration, our future, the future of the generations to follow us, is at risk if we don't find ways to take care of each other collectively to weather this moment. And so, I come to this work with lived experience and political ideology, of course, like I'll be transparent about that. But when I sit down and study the dollars and cents, it also is absolutely in our interest to invest in our fundamental freedoms and liberties, and including our immigrant communities. And to the point about push-pull, I mean, my fantasy, something else that keeps me going is the thought that in 4 years from now, we might be undergoing this like mass reconciliation effort where we're litigating for reparations for everyone whose fundamental freedoms were aggrieved in this administration, and maybe even seeking accountability for the attorneys that are litigating in bad faith to advance the Trump agenda in violation of the rules of ethics that guide our profession. I don't know if that's just a pipe dream, but I hold on to the history and also the option, the potential for us to kind of cycle back in the future towards something greater.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's exciting. That's intriguing. To what extent, and it's kind of a tangent to my last question. One of the ways in which marginalized communities, which in the early part of the 20th century and before that were targeted, are less so now, is because we have become more empowered as a result of voting rights, as a result of making our presence known, and so on and so forth. And Vermont provides an interesting example. I mean, I have here 3 progressive women, and that I think Trump would probably see as the enemy he's trying to eliminate. But I think also because this state has, despite its flaws, has been also attempting to try and build up and empower sections that were commonly referred to as marginalized. To what extent do you find, as far as states trying to learn, if any, from what Vermont is doing, to what extent do you find states asking you, what do we do? How can we, as other states, as member states of this nation, learn from you? Especially since, just in your introduction, I know that some of you represent LGBTQ folk, and you have a very strong conservative community that may be resistant to that. Yet I find necessarily, if we're going to survive as a nation, we have to find some common ground and some common community by which we can address a common problem. So where do you see that dialogue taking place, not only within this state, but also especially among states in need of your counsel and advice and direction?
I mean, just to put a point on the question, right, to underscore, in fact, like I resonate so much with the spirit of your question, because how politicized are the people at this table? All of us are queer, and actually Big and I are non-binary trans people. And so when you talk about executive policy that is explicitly targeting not just our organizations and the work that we do in the communities we serve, but our very personhood, Right, how do you, like that is the question, right? How do we bring our whole selves to work in a way that's sustainable and just? And then how do we also leverage the superpowers that those give us as we try to set an example and be a model for other states? I don't know, you said like you were going to talk, so I don't want to like jump in.
No, I think that to sort of the starting premise of the question, I'm going to push back a little bit on.
Okay.
You know, before this administration, we weren't lacking for work to do at the ACLU of Vermont. You know, addressing Vermont-specific issues and Vermont-specific actors, and so, you know, we're still working those cases. You know, our cases take years and years. We're still working those cases. At the same time, we're, you know, responding to and meeting the moment with this additional layer of threat. But I think, you know, all that being said, Vermont is a special place. Vermont, as any state, has the ability to be an incubator of new ideas, to put into place new protections that then ripple out, and you know, we can show the sky hasn't fallen when Vermont got civil unions, for example, right? And the sky hasn't fallen when Vermont was the first state to, by legislation, make marriage equality, full marriage equality, a reality. And so there are ways in which the question does speak to something true and genuine about Vermont and about its ability to show other states a different path is possible. And we do, from time to time, get outreach from other ACLU affiliates who see something we've been able to accomplish here and say, give us the guidebook, give us the playbook. We want to see that there, and we want to be able to go and point in our courts or in our state houses, point to Vermont and say, they did it, we can do it too.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and I'll echo, you know, I don't think that the way the state, capital S, of Vermont has done human rights and civil rights enforcement is amazing. I don't think that other agencies in other states, my counterparts in other states, look to our agency as doing anything special. In fact, I look to them and I say, how are you able to do all this? And a lot of it comes down to resources and systems and what their laws provide. And so I have followed their lead in requesting additional funding for our office, because especially the Human Rights Commission and the Attorney General's Office Civil Rights Unit are a very tiny group of people, and we have been running on a shoestring for decades. And that is not going to take Vermont in the direction that those of us who are progressive think Vermont should be in. And so, you know, by learning from my counterparts in other states, especially in the New England area, I have taken what they have shown me about how things are being done there, and I have gone to our legislators and said, hey, we need to do better, with some success. But there's still a lot of work to go.
Yeah, that's encouraging.
Yeah, I think it's both. In my experience, like with my kind of work, there are sometimes where we are really, you know, the state of Vermont, that when I say the state of Vermont, I mean the community-led movements that are pushing the state of Vermont and giving us direction as mouthpieces, but, you know, with their wisdom, where we're setting an example. And then there are other times where we are really trailing behind. And it, again, you know, I try, especially because I know I need to sustain myself over 4 years, you know, to give grace to the reality that there's a lot of stuff we're rushing to retrofit now that we've been shouting about into the wind for years, right? And I'm exhausted now, and I'm glad that it's all working out, but wouldn't it have been great if we could have had these conversations sooner about resource deficits, about underdeveloped infrastructure? But I guess, you know, as someone, I am not from here. I'm someone who's chosen to make my life here and build family here. And I also am always wary of tapping into the narrative of Vermont exceptionalism. But I will say, even the fact that, like, we can sit and have this discussion, right? Even to sit and talk with our identities as our whole selves, and even as someone who, like, I don't identify as a woman, but we can sit and have this dialogue and learn together and be in community and find common ground. Like, that's Vermont to me. Like the learning by doing and the grace that the community gives and receives, like across our movements and organizations, to stand together and learn together and grow together has, it's just really energizing.
Do you find a more of an awakening among Vermont residents that possibly as a result of things not going the way we want, saying, how do we get into this mess and how can we get out of it, and people turning to your organizations as a way of answering those questions more so than before? Does it take a crisis like this to bring more people to your work?
It can. You know, Jill was saying some of these things we've been saying for years, right? And they weren't getting purchase. And people are seeing how the impacts are felt by them specifically, or someone in their family, or waking up, as you said, to the systems and structures were already failing so many of us. And seeing now that the pain is more widespread, that the fear is more widespread, I think people, and I welcome people who hadn't been part of the movement, who hadn't been aware of, you know, all of the problems, the deep systemic foundational problems, who are, you know, getting their sea legs on this and learning and coming to it with an open mind and an open heart and a desire to help. And I think we need to, you know, continue to use our privilege, our educations, our knowledge to help people further along that path and help bring people to the point where they have confidence in exercising the rights, in demanding the protections and freedoms that we've been talking about for our entire careers.
I'm going to ask a question which I'm somewhat assuming that you have, but I shouldn't. Are there examples of communities or even nations that you have seen either within or outside of this nation that provides a wonderful model of how equity and justice can take place, can work, that in some ways inspire your vision of what human rights is all about? As I even say that, I know that, for instance, one of our senators, Bernie Sanders, is often referring to Scandinavian democratic socialism attempts as kind of models in which we might learn from. The bulk of our nation is not exposed or experienced to those kind of models. What do you bring as far as your experience to the work that you do that informs your sense of justice, your sense of equity? And let me just throw that out and see where it lands.
You can take a first crack if you. Well, to your earlier point about the identities and lived experiences that we bring and the communities that we're a part of, it does feel like a special strength as a queer person to be able to collectively envision a future that does not exist. We are, for folks who are gender expansive, or queer folks who don't see themselves reflected in leadership in spheres of power, we're marching toward a future that exists in our imaginations, right? And we're doing dream work and thinking expansively and creatively. And so I do think that is a skill set that like I've practiced as a trans person that I do bring to my work as an immigration rights activist, right? And someone working, and I draw on the collective wisdom of the queer elders who came before me, particularly trans feminine women of color who really paved the way for me to be someone who can be a trans lawyer and not have any risk of income insecurity or losing my health care, or right? And so that's like one kind of piece that comes up for me in your question. And then another reminds me of our earlier discussions about the cyclical nature of history, the back and forth. I find my mind goes not kind of side to side to other nations or regions or other states, but to the traditional owners of this land, to Native American people and First Nations people who had collective stewardship of community care and resources and accountability and lived in harmony with the environment since time immemorial. There's so many amazing teachings that we don't deserve to get to know now. I've been studying a lot about restorative practices, and there are some really interesting. Humans have an interesting history of a more collectively caring, sustainable, mutually supportive model of being together in society, and so that's what I think about a lot when I dream for the future.
Thank you. Lia or Big?
Yeah, I don't know that I could point to another nation that I would say they've got it all right, right? I mean, being a country is hard. Sort of establishing how you're going to distribute resources, how you're going to ensure safety, how you're going to ensure equality. These are tough questions that the philosophers, couldn't even come to any kind of agreement on. I think you can point to certain things you see in certain nations and say, yes, that is better than what we have. That's a better system. That's a better structure. And I was thinking when you were asking the question about sort of drawing inspiration, in 2015 and again in 2018, I believe, in Ireland, where you almost exclusively have to vote in person. There's no mail voting or overseas voting. And in both of those years, there were campaigns called Home to Vote, where people were encouraged who were living abroad to fly home to Ireland to vote to enshrine marriage equality and to repeal an almost complete ban on abortion. And the videos, the images, the narratives of folks going to extraordinary efforts to, at the last minute, book a flight, get home, vote. And both of these were extremely successful outcomes. And it brought tears to my eyes, just seeing these people who may or may not have a personal stake in that vote, but caring so much about the rights and dignity of their fellow countrymen and women that is what we're called upon to do. We're called upon to look beyond ourselves. We're called upon to find what tools we have, because we all have them, and how we can manage them. We're not asking everyone to fly across the world to fight the Trump administration, but we are asking people to answer the call when it's put out and to find, what their passion is, what their morality is telling them they need to do, and do it.
Thank you, Lia. Big, do you have anything to add?
I mean, it's such a rich conversation. There's so much to talk about. I think I really resonate with what Lia was saying about looking outside of the American system for examples of things that are better. And in some ways, yes, I need to do that. And in some ways, all of those systems tend to be rooted in oppression and colonialism in some way, and so are fundamentally concerning and problematic, while also having things about them that are great and that are better and that are a source for us to think about how to change and improve our systems. But for me, what sustains me with inspiration these days is really just taking those moments when you're in, community and celebrating that there is a sense of resistance and empowerment through that resistance that is uplifting, and finding the moments when you actually get in your work to be of service to another person. And when you know, and you see some sense of gratitude from a person that what you have done has benefited them, even if it's just a 5-minute phone call where you took time to listen to someone and validate their experience of oppression and injustice. I feed on those moments, and it's a part of the culture that I try to create in my workplace, and I think my friends do as well, which is to just soak those moments up for the gift that they are, that will propel us to the next day. That is a slog, and we just keep going. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, thank you all, Lia, Big, Jill, for your participation on this panel and in this discussion. We are truly a nation that continues to evolve. As I think one of you mentioned, we started out as a nation in which only white landed gentry males were allowed to vote, and we've expanded beyond that to become more inclusive. And right now we're still struggling with who has the right to assert him or herself or theirselves as American citizens. It seems as though that big money now determines our electoral process, and a lot of people are left out of that decision making. So we continue to be challenged. We continue to work for what it means to be an American citizen, what it means to be a human being. And I thank you for the work that you're doing and helping us to continually define what that means. Thank you. And I thank you, the viewers, for being a part of this discussion as well. We hope that you will continue to log in to programs such as this. And in the meantime, I thank you. Be well, be safe, and be blessed. Good day.
Let's talk about our hopes and dreams beyond the reach it seems. Let's talk. Confess I live in hell. I failed to fall in scheme. Maybe we can find a pathway forward or a clue. So we may together be a symbiotic harmony where I can talk to you, you can talk to me. Let's talk. Let's talk. Let's talk, let's talk, let's talk.